Great. So now we're at the second part of mechanism design. What is mechanism design? How is it related? Why is it important? We'll discuss all of that here. So this is the token economics framework that we have been talking about since the first lesson. And in the previous lesson, lesson 3, we talked about market design, which is this one over here. And market design really talks about the environment and the environment in which participants transact with each other, how they interact with each other, and to really build and design the environment for all of these things to interact with each other. Now we're moving on to mechanism design, where we're looking at the incentive mechanisms, the rules of the game, and the different governance and different kind of mechanisms to really to look at how the participants behave and kind of constrain their behaviors. So this is what we're going to look deeper at mechanism design. And we will be talking, in total, we'll be talking about the 3 building blocks, which is governance, which is more specifically decentralized governance, non-financial incentives, as well as the structure of your mechanism. And before we begin to go deeper into all of the factors, let's understand what mechanism design is. At a 101 level, mechanism design is really about the rules of the ecosystem. As I mentioned before in the human glossary part, rules of the ecosystem is just rules that are built in place to ensure that the ecosystem can function properly. And there are 2 types of rules that I mentioned. That one is embedded in code. It could be systemic rules or operational rules. And then you have behavioral rules. And these are stuff that's a little bit gray. These interact with the behaviors of people, and these take in more black and white gray stuff, as well as very subjective. Things that's embedded in code can be a lot more objective and black and white. If A happens, then B happens. But behavioral rules, it's a little bit difficult, and so we have to think more about how to manage them and what are the rules to govern the different behaviors. So why do we need mechanism design? When we talk about market design, we talk about thickness, congestion, and safety. These are the constraints when we're designing the environment. We want it to be thick. We don't want to have congestion so that transactions and interaction can continue to happen. And we want safety to happen. We want safety to be there so people feel safe to be using the ecosystem. But today we're going to talk about mechanism design. In mechanism design, we're looking at 2 aspects. We're looking at the things that's governed by code, which is stuff that we can put in smart contracts. We can build algorithms. We can put them in ABC in code and ones and zeros or rule of law, that kind of stuff. We can also go with the behavioral aspect, where we look at the softer side of things, the gray side of things, the side of things where it's a little bit more difficult to govern because it's very subjective, but it's very important because they're part of the whole mechanism. Because participants and humans are part of the ecosystem, we have to take them into consideration. So these are the 2 different arms that we're going to talk about. So in governance, you have the stuff, the behavior rules, and you have the system design, or you have the operational code and hard code stuff. Same with non-financial incentives as well as structure. We'll go deeper into them later. But today we're going to talk about governance first, and the next lesson we're going to talk about non-financial incentive and structure. But before we move on, let's understand a little bit more about why do we need to study mechanism design and how is it linked to the ecosystem. Firstly, it affects the long-term sustainability. We talk a lot about how we're building and designing systems that's sustainable in the long term. So when we talk about market design, we want it to be sustainable in the long term because we want the environment to continuously allow transactions and interactions between participants to happen. When we talk about mechanism design, we're setting the rules of the game. These rules have to be one level that's hard-coded, that deals with the general objective things, and then a different layer of behavioral stuff, of understanding what happens when the gray area happens, what happens when something subjective happens. And together they really build the rules to affect the long-term sustainability of an ecosystem. Remember, an ecosystem is dynamic. It keeps growing based on the participants that comes in, based on the interactions and transactions that's going on in the ecosystem. So when we talk about mechanism design, we are talking about how do we manage that? How do we understand what kind of rules can we put in place? And then we decentralize it out. And while it is decentralized, it is continuously growing and governing. We don't want something, a hard and fast rule that says only step on rocks when crossing the river. But there are a lot of there's something black and white, something objective. But something else to consider is also, you have to look at the speed of the water flow. Is there algae over there? Is the sun very strong so that there's a lot more algae? Is it maybe because it's summertime so there's a lot more algae and then it's slippery and then you fall? So you can't just rely on black and white rules. You also have to rely on dynamic rules, which is where mechanism design comes into place. So we have to design stuff from a centralized point of view. Then when we decentralize it, we have to consider how to continuously allow this decentralized governance to affect the rules of the ecosystem. The other thing is how it affects people's behaviors, because when we have rules of the game, people react differently to the rules. So for example, we could have different types of governance available. So everyone is part of the governance system, or everyone has a role to play in the mechanism, but they are in charge of different objectives. So it affects people's behavior, because if they have skin in the game, then they're more likely to behave differently, or they understand that maybe in the short term I can't get everything I want, but in the long term this is for the betterment of everyone. So maybe you have a governance body that controls money. This could be maybe 60% of the ecosystem, 66%, so 2/3 of the ecosystem are part of this governing body, and they control how money or token is being distributed, being given out, being created. And so this affects behaviors of people. So these rules will affect behaviors of people in very, very different ways, depending on how you design the rules and what kind of aspects of mechanism you're talking about. And lastly, something that we talk a lot about in the first lesson especially is that this is an ecosystem. An ecosystem, you have different types of participants. You have users, regular participants, developers, coders, entrepreneurs, foundation, like non-profit foundation, or investors. And all of them have very different incentives to participate, very different goals when they want to join the ecosystem. And what does it mean? It means that we have to align the incentives so that we have an objective of the ecosystem. So how can we align incentives to achieve that objective? And what are the mechanisms in place to incentivize all of them? Because maybe some incentive could work for person A, but not for person B. So these are things that you need to consider when designing the ecosystem. And this is also how mechanism design affects the ecosystem and affects the participants. So let's now move a little bit deeper into mechanism design 102 to understand a little bit more about what it means and how and explanations. So what I said this a lot of times. So mechanism design is the rules of the ecosystem. We want to put rules in place so that people know how to behave, and also because mechanism design is engineering plus economics, right? Economics is saying that this is the outcome that we want, and the engineering part is the how to get there. So we put some rules in place to get to the objectives that we want. How do we do that? Firstly, we have a framework to analyze. So we want to analyze what are the possible strategies people can take, and put some rules in place to constrain the strategy, so that to make sure that the rule says that you can't do this, you can't do that. So at the end of the day, you will choose this strategy because it's the strategy that you can do. You're not being punished when you do that, and you're incentivized to do that. And also, that's just step one. But step two is to understand what are the problems in place when we put these mechanisms when you design these mechanisms. Because there is no one perfect mechanism. It really depends on your token use case, your business model, your business idea, and what kind of objectives you want to achieve. And when we look at problems, when you have this mechanism in place, what are the other possible problems that could happen? Unforeseen problems that could really affect your ecosystem. That's something to consider. And lastly, why do we need mechanism design? Because we have different types of participants and they're incentivized by different things. So we need to think of ways to incentivize them to collectively reach a collective decision and achieve that social objective or achieve that ecosystem's objective that we want. So this is what mechanism design is about. And if we look even deeper into a simple equation, mechanism design is the incentives by various participants plus private information. So we talked about private information earlier. It could be assumptions, it could be specific information that you receive because you know someone in the ecosystem or in the foundation or something. It could be expectations, it could be research, it could be analysis, it could be observation. So private information is information that you gather, and it's not just freely available outside. And because of these two things coming together, the incentives and private information, people behave differently. So what we want to do with mechanism design is to put rules to incentivize people, and also ideally rules to allow information to be more spread evenly across everyone. So we don't want someone to have a lot of private information, and then other people don't have enough of the information, when this information should be freely shared with everyone. So how can we make sure that information is being shared properly? And this could be done with rules, this could be done with mechanism, there's a mechanism that we talked about in the second lesson called Harberger's taxation model. And this is one of the ways to tease out private information and to make the information available to everyone. So we'll talk about that in the future, but just a very simple idea is for you to understand that it's incentives plus private information will get the behavior of people. And remember, economics is about three things, right? Incentives, punishments, behavior. So this is how we want to understand how people behave, and then we can put different kind of rules to affect them. We can put rules to increase or decrease incentives, can put rules to tease out private information. So why do we have to study mechanism design? When we look at an example is in the centralized world, when we look at something that happens, let's say the global financial crisis in 2008, this is an issue that happens in the centralized world. What do we do? How do we deal with that? We have big bailouts. The government comes in and pays off the debt to help all the big companies to stay afloat, so that the whole financial market doesn't crash and everyone is back to ground zero. And how is this decided? This is decided with the central entity. You have like 20 people in the bank, in the government, or in the central bank. They come together, they resolve it, they decide, okay, this is how much money to allocate to these people and stuff like that. But is it fair? One problem that a lot of people, this is also where Bitcoin comes out from there, because is it fair? At the end of the day, the central bank and the government holds money that is people's money. It's my money. And if it's my money, why don't I have a say in how I can distribute it? Maybe I think that some banks are not worthy to be bailed out because they failed, and they failed people's expectations, and they failed. So they should be weeded out, like Darwin's evolution theory. If you're not good, then you're weeded out. So why do I have to save all of these companies, bail them out, allow these top execs to get the bonus based on my money, and they're not going to resolve problems? So that's one of the problems when it comes to the decentralized world. In the centralized world, you've got central entity and people to come and resolve the problems. It could be board of directors, it could be central banks, could be government, whatever. They come together, resolve the issue. These issues are not, in black and white in the constitution, and say that if this happens, we have to react this way. But these people come together and govern it dynamically based on whatever information is given to them. But in the decentralized world, it's slightly different, because now we don't have 20 people to decide everything. Everyone, as long as you have a stake in the game, as long as you are part of the ecosystem, you are able to come and govern it together. Your opinions can be heard. So this is quite difficult to govern them, because when it's 20 people, it's really difficult to organize and organize around these 20 people to make a decision, collective decision. But now when you have so many different people, different incentives, different kinds of participants, you have very different kind of ways to organize and govern a system. So we need mechanism design to kind of set some types of rules and some types of boundaries in place, so that we can start governing and ruling this ecosystem. So to take, for example, in Facebook, if I'm Facebook and I see that my participant, someone is writing very bad stuff that's against Facebook's policy, I can just say that, okay, I'm going to suspend your account and I'm going to delete your account because you're not being a good participant in my Facebook ecosystem. Because Facebook is centralized, they are the governing authority to say yes or no to different things. But when it's a decentralized economy, no one has the final say of anything or everything. So then it's a little bit more inefficient to organize activities, but then you have more equality because now everyone has an equal say. So we want to understand how do we deal with these kind of decentralized worlds, what kind of rules needs to be in place, what kind of level of governance needs to be in place. So this is the flow of analysis. First, we look at the design of environment. Then we want to understand how it affects the outcomes of interactions with participants, interaction with the incentive mechanisms that we have in place, interaction with incentives in general. Then at the end of the day, we want to achieve the objectives that we set out. So we talk about objectives in all of the lessons, lesson 2, lesson 3, and it's about achieving these objectives that we want. So we want to understand if the design and how the design and the interaction will achieve these objectives. And a very important assumption to make, this was done in lesson 2, is that we assume that people are rational. People are rational, and people will make choices that has the best interest for them. So they want to make the best choice that really maximizes their personal welfare or that's best for them. And it's quite difficult to always assume that, because sometimes people are always irrational. There are a lot of studies that shows that when people are being revengeful and they're thinking about revenge, they don't really care about maximizing their welfare, but they are caring about how to destroy the other person. But this is an assumption that this is a simple assumption that we're going to make. It's that people are always going to be rational and they're going to make the best choice available for themselves. So we can do that. We can model that in the economics design, which is the first level. And then we can enforce that to make people behave in a slightly more rational way with systems design. So we can use gamified systems or system design to enforce the rationality and deal with the irrationality of people. But we'll talk about that in the future. Right now, we're just going to focus on assuming that people are rational and they will make the best decision based on the information available. So based on the incentives that's given to them and the private information that they have, they'll make the best decision. The other thing we have to talk about is social choice function, because now it's decentralized, right? Now governance is decentralized, everyone can come in. We have to make a social choice. We talk about social choice in the second word for the human glossary. Is that how do we make a collective decision that looks at all the different needs available? And social choice is very interesting because there are different types of choices. You can be maximizing utility, minimizing cost, reducing time spent, increasing happiness, increasing equality of individuals. So these are different things that's possible to maximize as a social choice function. This could be, any one of this could be the collective decision making that you want in a society or in an ecosystem. But you have to decide which one to choose. And at the end of the day, we want to achieve a decision that's good for everyone. Now, this is a very simple statement, but it's packed with a lot of different things. So, what do you mean? What do you define by good? Does good mean increasing equality? Does good means increasing efficiency? Does good means reducing costs, maximizing profit, maximizing utility, reducing time spent, reducing congestion, increasing happiness, allowing more fairness in the society? How do you define good? And this good is really packed to the objectives that we want, that we talked about in lesson 2, the objectives that you want in the ecosystem. By having the objective, then you understand what's good and what's not. And when we define everyone, how do you define everyone? Does everyone have an equal say? So are participants, are users equally, their values and their opinions are equally worthy to investors? Or maybe investors are more important, or developers are more important, or the foundation is more important, or the merchants are more important, or the users are more important, participants are more important. It really depends, and it depends on the objective. So maybe if the objective is to maximize utility of participants, then we want to hear more from the participants' point of view, less focus on the investor's point of view, and it really depends on what the ecosystem is. But ultimately, it's about making a decision that is a collective decision based on all the different parameters available to get an outcome that is good for everyone. However you define good to be based on your ecosystem. And what is good mechanism design? Once again, I need to emphasize that there is no such thing as best mechanism design or one-size-fits-all mechanism design in the world. Okay, there's no such thing as that. However, there are some measures or criteria or benchmark that can suggest some forms of good mechanism design. Once again, because there is no such thing as best mechanism design, it really depends on your ecosystem, depends on what you want, what your objectives are, and what your token project or token outcome is. So first, it could be a Pareto efficiency. So that means you're allocating your resources fairly to everyone, that no one will gain more than the other. So it's efficient. That could be one mechanism. It could be strategy proof mechanism. So you are you will not allow collusion to happen, where you don't allow people to collude together and become a big whale and swallow up everyone else. Or it could be very fair, egalitarian mechanism that we talked about. How do you increase fairness, or how do you achieve fairness in an ecosystem? Or you can have different types of social welfare functions. So Bergson and Samuelson is one of the types of social welfare function that we have in economics, and it's basically what is the level of trade-off you want between efficiency and equality. So efficiency will be, when we talk about centralized worlds again, when we talk about the global financial crisis, you've got 20 people coming together as part of the central bank and government to resolve the problem. So it's although it takes a long time, it's slightly quicker than having everyone in the United States to vote and educate them. So it's efficient. When you have a central authority, it's a lot more efficient. Or you have a central node or master node, it's quicker to make decisions. So it's more efficient. At the same time, the trade-off will be equality. So now a lot of people's voices cannot be heard because you're taking them out of this decision-making matrix. So you want to understand, or you want to get a sense of how much equality do I want versus efficiency. If you are in a gaming system, like a crypto gaming, and you just want efficiency because you just want transactions to happen, and a lot of things will be validated by code anyway, then you could probably look at reducing equality because that's not a priority, but you can look at increasing efficiency because that's very important. You need 1 to 3 seconds transaction speed, because if I'm making a trade or if I'm attacking someone else in the game, then I don't want to wait for 15 minutes to see, did I kill this guy or not? Or did I gain this weapon so that I can use it or not? So it depends on the kind of strategies that you have in place. So how do we get started? Firstly, we have to define a problem that needs to be solved. Then we determine the social goods that needs to be achieved. And then we want to understand the constraints involved. We talked about this in the first lesson. I just want to reiterate this point because they all will impact the kind of mechanisms that will be put in place. So what are the factors in mechanism design? So if someone that is already very good in this and you're a nerdy expert, you can look on the right where you can look at these are the few things that's where you can deep dive a little bit more into. You can have social choice theory, wealth economics, trading institutions, all the way to law and economics, and understand how they can affect mechanism design. Also, because mechanism design is not in a specific industry, it's in all different kind of industries, and different industries use mechanisms or design mechanisms in different ways. So you can take a look at those other fields and then do your further research and study. But everyone else, like you and me, let's focus on the left and look at the different factors in mechanism design. We are looking at governance, non-financial incentives, and structure. Governance, when we talk about governance, we're talking about how do we constrain what are the rules, how's the system being governed and being taken care of, right? And we can look at consensus protocol and resolution mechanism. Consensus protocol be more of the human approach, where people come in and there'll be a human level of interaction when we get the consensus, when we're looking at consensus protocol, because we need a human input. Resolution mechanism is something that's a bit more objective. We can put it in black and white. We can put them in code, and we can design algorithms or a smart contract to resolve these very objective problems. And things that are more subjective, we will put them in the governance of where humans come into contact or humans are being needed, which is consensus protocol. And this is something very good because then we take away a lot of mundane things from humans. We outsource them to machines, and humans can really specialize in things they do very well, which is the human touch, the human analysis. We talk about non-financial incentives. We talk about financial incentives in the token design aspect, but we talk about non-financial incentives because these are also relevant in permissioned and permissionless blockchains. So you can start stuff like voting protocol, where humans get to vote, and how do we design the voting protocol versus allocation mechanism? How do we allocate different things based on the voting protocol? So people vote and then machines allocate. And how do we want to allocate, and what are the allocation mechanisms? And we also have the structure. So structure is how do we structure the mechanism? And we can have a bargaining protocol where participants bargain with each other to achieve an outcome, or just their interaction and transaction. We just call it bargaining because they're interacting with each other. And then you have community information, where we talk about how the community gets information with an automated way that can be done with robots, and where it's very objective. So these are the things that we will look deeper at. But today we're going to look specifically at governance and how governance affect mechanism design. So firstly, governance makes coordination easier. We talked about this just now. When we have a central authority, which is the governance, it's easier for them to manage and organize and coordinate activities. So for example, we have Amazon, and Amazon will look at all the different things going on. They will aggregate the information and say that, okay, maybe you are not a safe seller because you have bad reviews, always delivering late and just not credible. So as Amazon, I can just remove you. And so they are the one with the final say, and they can make decisions. So it's very easy to coordinate when you have a central authority, because I don't have to trust everyone. I just need to trust Amazon, and I can buy and sell things via the platform because I trust Amazon. Amazon will be the one that coordinates all the activities. If something goes wrong, Amazon helps me to resolve that. Whereas when we take Amazon out, now we have to trust everyone. Now we have to make sense of, we have to make sense with everyone. We have to make rules with everyone. In the worst case, with Amazon, I can just make a contract. Everyone just makes contracts with Amazon, right? So you just have to make one contract, and then Amazon will coordinate everything. But in a decentralized ecosystem, I have to make contracts with every single person, and it's just taxing. So this is where governance comes in. What are the rules that we can put in place to make it easier to coordinate as a decentralized entity? Governance also helps to facilitate activities in the ecosystem. Firstly, it makes it safe to participate, makes it easier for people to participate, and when you have let's say in a decentralized world, when you have smart contracts where it's automatically just given and written out, then it's safer for you to participate. So when we go back to the game example, when you have a decentralized tournament and automatically a smart contract is created based on the participants, it feels safe to participate because I don't have to trust them. I can trust the smart contract for activities to happen on the ecosystem. We also want to prevent congestion when issues arise, because when we talk about incomplete contracts, there's some situations that that's not done by the contract, and things could happen. So we can prevent congestion because governance comes in, governance helps to resolve the problem, and things continue to keep going. So there are a few forms of governance. I just want to talk about two. The first one is legislation. So you can follow a specific country's legislation, or you can form your own types of legislation. When we talk about a real world example, for instance, we have like high court, subordinate court, criminal court, different types of courts family courts that deals with very specific issues. So this could be a kind of governance that we have in place. We don't have courts, but we have different kind of authorities or DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations within the ecosystem to solve different problems that are put in place. Or we can have the design and creation of specific contracts or smart contracts. Then you can probably have a standard contract or template where the smart contract will input specific stuff. So let's say we're doing decentralized tournaments again. Where is the money escrowed in? How long is the lead time for division or allocation of resources? How long do you have to put your money in so that you're a participant? How do you define the winner? And all of these small little issues, we put them down. That's objective rules. And then governance will come in only when some things that needs to be arbitrated. So there are many ways that governance can facilitate activities in the ecosystem. So now we're going to understand, when we're going to apply governance to token ecosystems. There are two types of governance, as I keep mentioning. The first one is something that's black and white, that's very objective, and something that's subjective, that's a bit more difficult to analyze, to understand. So we're going to talk about two types of governance. You have coded governance, which is the black and white side of things. And what we want to do is to really have all these objective things that is, very mundane, very boring. We want to outsource it to robots, because robots are very good at that. and then the subjective things will be kept to humans because humans are much better at that. So let's look at resolution mechanisms, which are the coded governance. So this is automated. Firstly, smart contracts, they are hard-coded into the system. Why do I say that smart contracts are resolution mechanism? Smart contracts, if you don't know what smart contracts are, it's a very basic contract that has just one premise. If something happens, then something else happens. So in smart contract, I will write that if I bet that the candle will go out in 2 hours, so that's my if statement, then I will get half a Bitcoin. That's my reward. So it's a very simple statement that it's hard-coded into the system, and you just two parties just agree. So you can resolve all of these problems very easily with smart contracts that's automated. So it will see. So somehow the smart contract will see that if it is in 2 hours, and is the candle still there or not, and how do you deal with, and then how do you allocate the rewards. So these smart contracts are automated. The other stuff that is automated are oracles. So oracles connect smart contracts with data from the off-chain world. So this is where the automation, so smart contracts is just if something, then something, right? But the if something part, this clause, how do you get information there? We use oracles. So oracles is just automatically gets data from the outside world, or maybe on-chain world, whatever, but usually from the off-chain world, come in and put it into the smart contract, and so the smart contract can make a decision, and then we don't need humans to go and verify, oh, the candle is still there. No, maybe we have an IoT device that can track if the level of carbon dioxide in the room or the level of oxygen in the box, and decide if the candle is still there or not. So these are different ways to do that, and different oracles. So another example is shelling point. So shelling point is one of the resolution mechanisms that is possible. So we talk about shelling point, I think in lesson 2. So shelling point is basically a natural point that people tend towards. Sometimes we call it focal point, and it's by an economist called Thomas Schelling. That's why we call it shelling point. So he found out that people naturally just tend towards a specific point or specific goal. And if I say, let's meet tomorrow in New York, where will you go? You'll probably meet at 12 p.m. in the Grand Central Station, because that's just a natural point that people tend towards. And majority of people go towards that. So if that's something that people naturally do, can we automate this? Can we automate this natural phenomenon that people exhibit and turn them into resolution mechanisms? And this is what these three protocols have done: Witnet, Shelling Point, and Truthcoin. Now I'll share a little bit more about what they are and how did they use Shelling Point as an automated resolution mechanism so that we don't need so much of human inputs. So I put Witnet first, Witnet followed by Shelling Coin followed by Truthcoin, because that's the level of automation reduces to a certain extent. Witnet is a purely decentralized Oracle network, and the voters are computer nodes, so computers. So it's 100% automated. Shelling Coin it can be peer-to-peer, it can be humans, and it can be robots or machines. Depends on the things that you're asking them. I'll talk about that later. So it's to some extent automated. And then Truthcoin is just peer-to-peer. It's a peer-to-peer Oracle and a prediction market. So the system is automated, but the way it's getting information is slightly less automated because you've got human inputs. So it reduces in automation from Witnet to Shelling Coin to Truthcoin. So what's Witnet? Witnet is a decentralized Oracle network, and it uses computers as votes. So think of Oracle as this big ball, the crystal ball, and then you ask them questions, and the crystal ball will go out to the off-chain world, find out information, come back and give you the answer. So it's easy if it's an objective thing, right? So that's what Witnet does. Witnet, you tell the computer that what's the temperature in Helsinki yesterday at 4 p.m. Witnet's computers will go into all the different weather forecasts in Helsinki all around the world, and then tap into their APIs to get information. Then they will get information, they come back, and then they will verify the data against each other to see which is the information that's right. And the Shelling Point is where it's the right answer, right? Because majority of people tend towards that. If the temperature is like 30 degrees Celsius, because it's summertime, and majority of them say so, then yeah, that's the answer. That's the Schelling point to say that that's the answer, and then they'll be rewarded in whatever tokens available. So, and then with Schelling, that's WitNet. With Schelling coin is interesting because it provides data as well, but it provides subjective data. And what do I mean? Because it can be any questions that you want to ask. Let's say it can be any question. And how do they define the natural point? Is they look at the median. Median means the 50th percentile, which means the exact middle of all the answers available. Then you just take the middle one, and then they have a plus 25 and minus 25 percentile. So a 25 to 75 percentile, that's where majority of people are. That's where we call them the Schelling point, where majority of people tend towards, and that's the correct answer. And that's interesting because with Schelling coin, it's slightly different because it's not objective. It's very subjective. So let's say you ask, what's the best show on Netflix? And it's really subjective. So we take a vote on the 25 to 75 percentile, which is the middle point. So you really exclude the extreme ones. And that's the right answer. That's the 25 to 75 percentile. And then they're rewarded with tokens. And then the ants will lose out their tokens. So that's Schelling coin. That's how Schelling coin works as an oracle. And Truth coin is where it's peer-to-peer, and people basically own the vote coin. They can vote on the outcome that they think is true. So oracles will just go out and get information, and then for WitNet is you verify data based on computers, right? With Truth coin, as a voter, I've got a coin. I can vote on that. I can vote whether the outcome that's taken by the oracle, the data is by the oracle is true or not. So these are different types, and obviously the one that the majority is the one that people tend towards, and that's the Schelling point, which is the correct answer. So these are some automated resolution mechanisms that are in place to allow people to get to allow information to be available for everyone, and you don't need so much human input. You can use a lot more automation, and then when the oracle gets the right information, then it can execute the smart contract and everything will be allocated. So you don't really have so much human inputs. Which brings us to the next point on consensus governance. So those are easy when it's subjective. What's the temperature in Helsinki at 4 p.m. yesterday? That's very obvious. It's either this temperature or not. You can deviate by some degree, but no one will say that it's negative 20 degrees Celsius yesterday during summertime, mid-summertime in Helsinki. So it's very easy for coded governance to happen when it's objective. But what about when it's subjective? What about when there is no right answer to that? You need consensus governance. So this is where it's not automated. You have more human input in it. And there are many, many ways to do that. One way could be a different layer of governance. So we talked about legislations just now. When we talk about in the real world, you've got high court, family court, criminal court, subordinate court, all the different kind of courts available. And likewise, you can bring that kind of concept into your token ecosystem, and you have different types of governance. So it can be direct governance because some people have governance tokens, or it could be different layers, different DAOs, DAOs, so decentralized autonomous organizations that they come together to form a type of governance. So in case of external force, in case of something happens, these different organizations act like different types of courts trying to resolve problems. So maybe in MakerDAO's example, you have 4 different layers of governance, 4 different types of people in charge of different things. And one will be, because MakerDAO is a coin that is pegged to US dollar. One DAI is $1. And what happens when DAI becomes too high or too low? Then you have a governance that deals with that. What happens because you're pegged to USD? What happens when USD goes crazy? Then you're pegged to. And then that group of governance comes in to resolve that. What happens when the whole financial system collapses? That's it. Not just USD, but all around the world collapse. What happens? So that's the other form of governance comes in to resolve that problem. So one example is you can have different type of governance to resolve that. You can do this based on the different expertise of people, or you can do it based as just a decentralized organization and allow people to just come in. Another example would be when you're talking about like news curation, then you have based on the different expertise in the field. So maybe one is in the US market, one's in the China market, one is in the economy of the world, one is in geopolitics, one is in sports. And you have this boards of authorities or key personnel, key expert personnel coming in together to form governance to help to resolve problems when problems arise. The other thing is also, how do we want to increase honest interaction with participants? Because there's something very important. How do we, if people are honest, then that's a very good way to get consensus. And honest interaction, that's something that we talked about 2 lessons ago. We talked about incentive compatibility. How do we want to make sure that people are honest with each other, and then they don't cheat, and they don't cheat their peers, right? So there are 3 ways, 3 examples. The first one is token curated registries. The second is conviction voting, which is very new. And the third is design. You can have different design details. So token curated registries are decentralized registries, decentralized lists where people can vote and put their things up there. So what do I mean? So let's say if I say, let's have the best pizza in Milan, and it's a decentralized list. If you want to vote John's Pizza, you stake your tokens and then you vote it. And then if someone disagrees with the vote, they can challenge you. And this is where consensus mechanism comes in. Your challenge is taken up to a governance, one of the layers of governance, and then you try to resolve that and see if John's Pizza is the best or not, and goes back to the decentralized list. So this is how it works. And you can do like every Wednesday there'll be a voting on token curated registries to get the best pizza. That's one way, but it's very easy to cheat. It's slightly less easy to cheat than what the systems that we have now, where you can fake reviews. But it's also easy to cheat when you have a lot of tokens, and then you just keep, every time there's a fight, you have money to keep fending off people. The other thing is conviction voting. It's like an evolution from token curated registries. And conviction voting is an ongoing, continuous vote. So every time you have to keep broadcasting your vote broadcasting your option. So every time you have to keep saying that John's Pizza is the best pizza in Milan, and I'm staking this amount. And then the next round, you have to keep voting and keep saying that so that now you have a more stake in the game, and then you're incentivized to keep getting there. And also, this is where you can build consensus with people, and this is where human interaction comes in. The other thing is also design details. So you can have very simple stuff, like you can have a black list or white list of shops, pizzerias that are really, really bad reviews. No one votes for them. And as long as you're one of the list, you can be on the token curated registries, or white list. Maybe not for pizza, but whitelist for information, like which news source is the best, and then you can whitelist some of them because they are just generally very neutral. So these are some consensus mechanisms that are put in place that's not automated. And of course, you have your usual consensus protocols, like your proof of stake, proof of work, proof of importance, proof of authority, proof of influence. There's so many different proof protocols available to achieve consensus. And this is where human comes in. And all of these, these are all ways to get consensus with each other in a more curated form. And then this is like layer 1, and then layer 2 is the kind of consensus mechanisms and protocols you want to put in place. So it could be one person, it could be proof of stake, proof of work, or whatever that you have that's suitable for your system. So that's that. We talked about what mechanism design is. We talked about the first one on governance. The next lesson we're going to do deeper into non-financial incentives and structure. Voting is something that's very, very interesting and very, very powerful, that I want to talk a little bit more about that. And then the lesson after, we're going to do a big case study to look at an example and how do you apply mechanism design into this example. And then I will complete all of that with a lecture note, which I will update you when it's done. In the meantime, I would love to get your feedback. I've also included name the feedback now, so you get a 10% discount if you provide feedback. So you can scan the QR code over here, or you can go to the link below, bit.ly/big E big D -feedback. And till then, I'll see you in the next lesson. Bye.